The silence after the word landed was the kind that made people check their phones just to have somewhere to look. Every person in the conference room had heard it. The junior associates near the window, the two partners who had stopped mid-sentence, the assistant who had just walked in carrying a tray of water glasses and now stood frozen in the doorway. They had all heard it, and now every one of them was watching Vivienne Ashford. She did not react immediately. That was the first thing that surprised them. She set her pen down on the legal pad in front of her, aligned it with the edge of the paper, and looked across the table at the man who had said it. Elliot Carter had already realized what came out of his mouth. He knew it from the way the room went quiet. He was not a man who flustered easily. 38 years in mergers and acquisitions had trained that out of him. But in that moment, with 14 people watching him and Vivienne Ashford's dark eyes holding steady on his face, he felt something close to it. "Mrs. Ashford," he said, keeping his voice level. "My apologies. That was don't." She picked up her pen again. "Finish the sentence you were actually making." The room stayed quiet. One of the junior associates near the window slowly lowered his phone. Elliot looked at her for a moment. Then he looked down at the document in front of him. The acquisition proposal his firm had spent 4 months building, and he finished the sentence. He had not meant to say it. That much was simply true. He had been in the middle of a point about the liability structure in the Ashford Group's subsidiary holdings, and the word had come out the way a wrong exit on the highway comes, automatic, before the mind catches up. His daughter called him that at the end of their Sunday phone calls. His wife had called him that for 22 years before she died. The word lived in some part of him that existed outside of conference rooms and acquisition proposals, and the careful professional vocabulary he had built over 4 decades. He had said sweetheart to Vivienne Ashford, the majority shareholder and acting CEO of Ashford Capital, in front of her entire legal team. He drove back to his office on the 41st floor of the Daily Center building with the windows down, something he never did in Chicago traffic, because the air helped him think. The proposal was still in play. She had not thrown him out. She had simply looked at him with something he could not immediately categorize, not anger, not amusement exactly, and told him to keep going. He had kept going. He did not know if that was better or worse. His assistant, Renata Cole, was waiting by his desk when he got back. "How did it go?" she said. It wasn't a question. "Fine," Elliot said. Renata had been with him for 11 years. She was 54, organized in a way that functioned like architecture, and she did not believe him when he said things were fine without looking up from her tablet. She looked up from her tablet. "There was an incident," he said. He told her. He gave her the plain version without context or softening, because she would ask for it anyway if he didn't. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "How did she react?" "She told me to finish my point." Renata considered this. "And you did?" "I did, and she stayed in the room for the full 2 hours. Renata set her tablet down on his desk. "Then the deal isn't dead." "I know it isn't dead," Elliot said. "I'm not worried about the deal." She looked at him with the specific expression she used when she did not believe him, but had decided not to press. He sat down at his desk and opened his laptop and stared at the acquisition proposal without reading it. Vivienne Ashford had inherited the controlling interest in Ashford Capital 9 years ago when her father died. She had been 31 at the time and running the firm's London office. Most of the board had expected her to sell. Some of them had already been making preliminary calls to the larger players, feeling out interest, positioning themselves for a transition. She had not sold. She had also not done what they expected next, which was to bring in a more experienced executive to run operations while she held a nominal position. She had moved back from London, taken the CEO seat herself, and spent the following 18 months quietly removing every board member who had made those calls. Not firing them exactly, making the position untenable for them in a way that took slightly too long to trace. Elliot knew this because he had done his research before walking into that conference room. He had read the case histories, the industry profiles, the 3 or 4 long pieces various business publications had run on her over the years. He had read an interview she gave to a financial quarterly in which she talked about her management philosophy without once using the word ruthless, which he thought was itself a kind of statement. He had read enough to know that she was not a woman who let things pass without a reason. The fact that she had let the incident pass meant she had a reason for it. He just didn't know what it was yet. The follow-up meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday. Her office this time, not the neutral conference room on Michigan Avenue they had used for the first session. Her office was on the 32nd floor of the Ashford Capitol building in River North. High ceilings, east-facing windows, the kind of view of the lake that cost more per square foot than most people made in a year. The furniture was deliberate without being showy. Clean lines, no clutter, a single piece of sculpture on the credenza that Elliot recognized as a Noguchi replica, but could not confirm as original. He was early by 4 minutes, which was his standard. He stood at the window and looked at the lake until she came in. She was in a different suit than the first meeting. Dark charcoal, well cut, no jewelry except a watch on her left wrist that was simple enough to be either very inexpensive or extremely expensive. He had learned over the years that very simple watches on very wealthy people were almost always the latter. "Mr. Carter," she said, and set a folder on her desk without extending her hand. "Sit down." He sat. She opened the folder, glanced at something inside, and then looked at him with a directness that he had noticed in the first meeting and was noticing again now. Not aggressive, but with no social buffer built into it. No small talk to ease the transition. Just, "Here we are, let's work." "Your valuation of the subsidiary portfolio," she said. "Walk me through the methodology." He walked her through it. He had done this enough times that the explanation came without effort, which meant he had the cognitive space to watch the room. The way she listened without taking notes for the first 5 minutes. The way she started writing only when he reached the part about the contingent liability structure. The way she stopped him once, not to disagree, but to ask a technical question about how they had weighted a particular asset class given the rate environment. It was a good question. It was the kind of question that told him what she already knew. "You've looked at this before," he said. "Not just this proposal, the underlying structure." She did not confirm or deny it. She asked another question. They worked for 2 hours. The conversation was professional in the precise sense of the word, contained to the subject matter, technically demanding no soft edges. At the end of it, she closed the folder and sat back in her chair. "There's a problem with the earn-out clause in Section 14, she said. "I know." She looked at him. "You know we flagged it internally before submission. The timing structure creates a perverse incentive in month 16 through 22. Our team's position is that a milestone-based trigger would resolve it, but the specific trigger metrics are negotiable." She was quiet for a moment. The kind of quiet that was not absence of thought, but the opposite. "Your team flagged it and submitted anyway. We submitted because the rest of the proposal is sound and we wanted the conversation." The clause was an invitation. "To what? To this," Elliot said. "To see how you approach a problem that doesn't have an obvious answer." The room was quiet. Outside, 32 floors below, the city moved at its own velocity. "That's an unusual way to run a negotiation," she said. "It tells me more than a clean proposal would." She looked at him for a moment. There was something in her expression that he could not immediately read. It wasn't displeasure, and it wasn't the careful neutrality she had maintained through most of the morning. It was something that sat between assessment and something else. "Your wife," she said. "When did she pass?" The question landed without warning. He did not change his expression. This was one of the things he had trained into himself over years, the ability to hold his face steady when something moved beneath it. 4 years ago, he said. She nodded once. She did not say she was sorry, which he found he didn't mind. The condolence reflex was something people reached for because they didn't know what else to do. She seemed to know what she was doing. "The word," she said. "From the first meeting, yes. She used to call you that." It was not a question. He answered it anyway, "Yes." She looked at him for another moment. Then she looked down at the folder. "The earn-out clause." She said, "I want to see the milestone proposal in writing by Thursday." He called his daughter that evening. Lily. Lily had her mother's habit of answering the phone before the first ring finished, which still startled him even after all these years. "How's the Ashford deal?" she said before he could say anything. "Moving forward, that's not what I'm asking." He stood at the kitchen window and looked at the street below. His apartment was on the 14th floor of a building in Lincoln Park that he had moved into 3 years after Margaret died, when the house in Evanston became too large and too quiet in a ratio that he couldn't manage anymore. The apartment was smaller than the house. It was the right size for one person who worked too much. There was a complication at the first meeting, he said. "What kind?" he told her. There was a pause on the other end. "Dad." It was unintentional, obviously. Another pause. How did she react? "She told me to finish my sentence. And you did, and I did." He could hear her thinking. Lily was a civil engineer in Portland. She thought in load tolerances and stress distributions and the physics of how things held together under weight. When she thought, she was quiet in a particular way. "She's not angry," Lily said. "Apparently not. So she's interested." I didn't say in the acquisition. He let that sit without answering it. "The deal is complicated," he said. "Don't read anything into it. I'm not reading anything into anything. I'm just noting that if she was a few offended, she would have ended the meeting, and if she was only interested in the acquisition, and she didn't do either." He said nothing. "Just pay attention," Lily said. "That's all I'm saying." The Thursday milestone proposal went in on time. By Friday afternoon, Vivienne's legal team had sent back a response, not a counter exactly. It was a set of questions organized with the kind of structural precision that told him she had read it herself before passing it to anyone else. He wrote the responses himself, which was not his usual practice at this stage of a deal. He typically had one of the senior associates draft, and he reviewed. But the questions had a particular rhythm to them that he thought deserved a direct answer. And there was something he wanted to see in the exchange, whether she was responding to the proposal or to him. He sent the responses Sunday evening. She replied at 6:43 Monday morning. 3 sentences, 2 technical clarifications, and 1 line at the end. "The milestone structure is acceptable. Proceed to the next section." Renata, when she came in at 8:30 and found the exchange in the shared drive, looked at the timestamp of Vivienne's response and then looked at Elliot. "She works Sundays," Renata said. "Apparently. So do you. I always have." Renata turned back to her desk without adding anything to that. The third meeting was dinner. This was Vivienne's suggestion, which surprised him. He had assumed the next session would be another working meeting in a conference room, the kind of controlled environment that suited the tone they had established. Dinner was different. Dinner was harder to contain. She chose the restaurant, a place on the north side of the river, smaller than he expected, the kind of room that was quiet enough to have a real conversation. He had looked it up and found that it had been open for 11 years, which in Chicago restaurant terms meant it was a place people came back to, not a place they came to once to be seen. She was already there when he arrived. This surprised him too. In his experience, people in positions of power arrived late as a structural choice. She was at the table with a glass of water and a small notebook open in front of her, and she did not appear to have been waiting with any particular impatience. "You're early," he said. "So are you," she said. He sat down. The notebook was open to a page with handwriting on it. He couldn't read it from across the table, but it looked like a list. She closed it when he sat down and put it in her bag, which he found he noted. They ordered without significant deliberation. She asked him what the wine situation was in the area she was considering for one of the subsidiary offices. And this became a conversation about Chicago's commercial real estate geography, which became something else. A longer exchange about how neighborhoods shifted around anchor institutions and what that meant for long-range investment value. She knew things about the West Loop development corridor that were specific and current, and that he had not expected. He told her that. "You didn't think I'd done the research," she said. "I thought you delegated the research." She considered this without apparent offense. "I read everything myself first. Then I send it to the team for the pieces I don't have context for. That's a significant time investment. It's the only way I know what to do with what they give me." She turned her wine glass by the stem, a small gesture. "My father delegated everything. He had good judgment about people, so he knew who to trust. I'm still building that." He thought she was being more candid than she usually was. He wasn't sure if that was the wine. She was on her first glass, or something else. "How old were you when you came back from London?" he said. 31, and you'd been running the London office since 27. He did some brief arithmetic. "Your father sent you there at 27. My father told me I was going there to run it, yes. Whether he sent me or I decided is a matter of interpretation depending on who you ask. What's your interpretation?" She looked at him steadily. "I went because I wanted to prove something. He gave me the opportunity because he wanted to see if I could. We both got what we wanted out of it, and when he died," she didn't flinch at the directness. He had noticed by now that she didn't. "When he died," she said, "I came back because it was the right thing to do. Not because I was ready." This was the most personal thing she had said to him across 3 meetings. He recognized it as such without making anything visible of it. "Was it difficult?" he said. "The first year, yes." She said it without ornamentation. "The board expected me to fail. Some of them were hoping for it. It would have justified the things they were already planning. But you didn't." "No." She looked at her plate. "I didn't have the option." When the dinner ended, They stood on the sidewalk outside the restaurant in the mild October air, the river 2 blocks south, the sound of the city at that specific evening register that was different from the daytime. Her car was already waiting, a black car, not a driver who had been called but one who had been there, which told him something about how she organized her time. The liability question, she said, pulling on her coat. Section 9, the indemnification structure. What about it? It's still weak. Your team knows it's weak. He had known she would get there eventually. What specifically? She told him specifically. She was right. The weakness was there, and she had found the exact load-bearing seam in it, which was not something most counterparties caught this early. He told her she was right. She looked at him with an expression he had not seen from her before. Not quite surprise, but something adjacent to it. Most people argue the point, she said. Most people argue because they're not sure they're wrong. I'm sure I'm wrong. We can fix it. She was quiet for a moment. The car waited. The driver, he noticed, didn't look at them. Thursday, she said. Send me the revised language. You'll have it Wednesday. She got into the car. The door closed. He watched it pull into traffic and merge with the other lights moving west. He had been in this business long enough to know the difference between a negotiation that was moving toward a conclusion and one that was circling its own center. This one was moving. He could feel the momentum of it. Each meeting closing a distance, each exchange landing cleanly, the kind of transactional rhythm that happened when both parties actually wanted the same outcome. He also knew, in the part of himself that he kept separate from his professional judgment, that there was something else in this particular negotiation that he had not encountered in the previous 38 years. He did not examine it directly. He had learned over the years that direct examination of certain things before they were ready to be examined produced conclusions that weren't accurate. It was better to let the shape of a thing become clear before deciding what it was. He sent the revised indemnification language on Wednesday. She responded Wednesday evening with a single word, acceptable. Then below it, how do you take your coffee? He read the line twice. Then he wrote back, black. There was a pause of about 40 minutes. Then I'll have them set up a working session at my office Friday morning. 8 o'clock. He replied, I'll be there at 7:56, another pause. Shorter this time, that's unnecessarily precise. He looked at the screen for a moment, then he typed, it's accurate. The Friday morning session ran 4 hours. They worked through sections 9 through 17 of the acquisition proposal, which was the dense technical middle of the document that most senior executives passed to their legal teams without reading. She read it. She had questions about language in section 12 that required him to call one of his associates and ask for backup documentation, which he did, standing in the hallway outside her office while she took a call of her own. When he came back in, she was at her desk and there was a second cup of coffee on the table in front of the chair he had been sitting in. Black. He sat down. He picked up the cup. He didn't say anything about it, and neither did she. They worked through lunch. At some point, her assistant brought in sandwiches without being asked, which told him this was a known pattern. She worked through lunch when a meeting was going well, and the staff had learned to prepare for it. At 2:15, she closed the folder. The remaining sections are technical, she said. I'm going to have my legal team draft the proposed modifications and send them to yours. That's standard, yes. She looked at him. The non-standard part is that I'd like to schedule one more working meeting before we move to final terms. Not about the document. He waited. There are 3 real estate assets in the subsidiary portfolio that your team's analysis may have underweighted. I want to walk through the physical properties, a site visit, 2 sites. The third is in Milwaukee. I'm not asking you to drive to Milwaukee for a preliminary. I would drive to Milwaukee. She looked at him with that expression again, the one that was adjacent to surprise without being quite that. I know you would, she said, but we'll start with the 2 here. The site visits were scheduled the following week. They drove separately to the first one, a warehouse conversion in the West Loop that the subsidiary had been holding for 11 years. He arrived first, stood in front of the building reading the exterior, the loading dock access, the street infrastructure around it, the way the new development corridor was pressing in from 3 sides. She arrived 4 minutes later. She stood beside him on the sidewalk for a moment without saying anything, looking at the same things he had been looking at. It's worth more than your team calculated, she said. Significantly more. Why did they miss it? Because they were looking at current revenue and applying a standard multiplier. They weren't looking at the position of the asset relative to where the neighborhood is going. Where is it going? He pointed north, then east. He told her what he had observed. The anchor institutions moving in, the demographic pattern, the specific signals he had learned over years to read in the way a neighborhood moved before the numbers caught up. She listened in the way she listened in meetings, completely, without filling the silence with noise. "My father bought this when it was producing nothing," she said after a moment. "The board thought he'd lost his mind. He was reading the same signals." She looked at the building for another moment. He didn't talk about it in those terms. He said it felt right. He probably didn't want to have to defend the methodology to a board. She laughed. It was a short sound, quiet, the kind of laugh that came out before the person decided whether to let it. He noticed it because it was the first time he had heard it. "That is almost exactly what he would have said," she said. The second site was south of the loop, a mixed-use building with residential above and retail below. They walked through it with the property manager, a man named Colton Price, who clearly knew Vivienne, and was managing his awareness of Elliot in a way that suggested he was trying to understand the dynamics of the room. After the walkthrough, Colton walked them to the rooftop. The city from up there was the particular version of itself that you only got from middle height, high enough to see the grid of it, low enough to hear it. "The retail on the ground floor," Elliot said. "What are you doing with it?" "Half of it's leased," Vivienne said. "The other half has been sitting. The configuration is wrong for what the street now wants. That corridor has shifted in the last 3 years. You need smaller footprints, not the large format retail it was designed for. I know. I've been trying to get the board to approve the subdivision. They haven't. They're looking at the cost of the renovation and not at what the space is worth once it's filled. Standard problem." She turned away from the view and looked at him. The light was different up there. The October afternoon sun coming in at a low angle, the city noise reduced to a kind of background frequency. "This is what you do," she said. It wasn't a question. "In part, you look at the thing that isn't working and find the reason it isn't working and tell people what they don't want to hear about it." He considered this. Most of the time they eventually listen. Most, not all. She looked at him for a moment. Then she turned back toward the stairs. "I'll get the board to approve the subdivision," she said as she walked. "They'll argue about it for 2 weeks and then they'll approve it, because I'll give them something easier to argue about instead. You'll trade them a smaller disagreement for the bigger one. I've been doing it for 9 years." There was a period, in the following 2 weeks, where the deal moved at its own pace and the contact between them was primarily through their respective teams. This was normal. He had other work. She had other work. The proposal was in the technical phase, where lawyers and accountants moved it forward, and senior people were called in only for specific decisions. He found in that period that he was working through sections of the proposal with more attention than he typically brought to documents at that stage. He told himself it was because the deal was complex. He did not examine this explanation closely. Renata one morning put a cup of coffee on his desk and said, "She called." He looked up from his screen. "Mrs. Ashford. She has a question about Section 19. She said she'd prefer to talk to you directly rather than through the team." "Did she say why?" "She said the question was interpretive, not technical." He picked up the phone himself. She answered on the second ring. "The indemnification carve-out in Section 19, she said. Your original language limits the carve-out to direct damages. I want to understand the reasoning for that constraint." He explained the reasoning. It took about 6 minutes. She asked 2 follow-up questions. He answered them. There was a pause. "That's what I thought," she said. "I wanted to confirm I was reading it right. You were." Another pause. "There was something else," she said. He waited. "The site visits were useful," she said. "Not just for the deal." He said after a moment. "I thought so too." The pause that followed was different from the professional ones that had preceded it. He noticed the difference without naming it. "The Milwaukee property," she said. "I'd like to do that walkthrough before we reach final terms. Not because it's necessary, because I want a second opinion on something. I'll drive to Milwaukee," he said. "You said that before." "I meant it before." A brief silence. "Next Thursday. I'll send you the address." They drove separately to Milwaukee. He arrived to find her already there, standing in front of a former industrial facility that sat on the edge of a neighborhood he could see was in a specific phase of its own transition. Past the roughest point before the prices moved. He stood next to her and looked at the building for a moment. "What's the question?" he said. "The industrial zoning," she said. "If we convert, we lose the manufacturing overlay. The consultants say that's fine. I think they might be wrong." He looked at the building for another moment. Then he walked around it. Not quickly, methodically, reading the infrastructure, the neighboring properties, the access points, the loading situation, what the alley behind it said about the block's commercial history. When he came back, she was where he'd left her. "Your consultants are wrong," he said. "The manufacturing overlay is worth more than the conversion premium. This neighborhood is going to need industrial space in 8 to 10 years. You're one of the last parcels positioned to provide it." She looked at him. "That's a long hold. You've been holding the West Loop building for 11 years. That was my father's decision. Now it's yours." She was quiet for a moment. The wind off the lake was colder here than in the city, the kind of cold that was honest about what the season was doing. "My board will not like this answer," she said. "No, my board will want the conversion premium now. Yes." She looked at the building. "You think I should hold it. I think the data supports holding it. What you do with that is your decision." She turned and looked at him directly. "What would you do?" He had been asked this in some form many times by many clients, over many years. He typically redirected the question back to the client's own priorities and risk tolerance, because that was the appropriate professional position. He had been doing this long enough to know when that answer was accurate and when it was a way of avoiding a harder thing. "I'd hold it," he said. She looked at him for a moment longer than the question required. Then she nodded once and looked back at the building. "I'll hold it," she said. The final terms of the acquisition were agreed 11 days later. His team and her team in a conference room on Michigan Avenue, working through the last open items with the kind of focused efficiency that came from good preparation, and both parties wanting the same result. He was in the room. She was in the room. They did not speak directly to each other for most of it. The conversation moved through the lawyers, which was how it should move at that stage. But twice he caught her looking at him across the table, and twice she did not look away immediately, and he recognized that for what it was. When the final document was initialed and the room began its post-agreement dispersal, she walked over to him. "Mr. Carter," she said. Ms. Ashford, you said something at the first meeting," she said. "By accident. I did. I didn't ask you to apologize for it at the time. No, I'm asking you not to apologize for it now." He looked at her. He did not change his expression, but something in him settled with the precision of a door closing properly in its frame. "I didn't intend to," he said. She looked at him for a moment. Then, "There's still the post-acquisition integration. That's going to take 6 months at minimum. I assume your firm is handling it." "We are. Then we'll be working together for some time. It appears so." She adjusted the strap of her bag, a small, uncalculated gesture that he had learned by now to notice when it happened. "Thursday," she said. "If you're available. There's a property question that came up on the integration side. I'm available Thursday." She nodded once. She turned to go. "Ms. Ashford," he said. She stopped. He looked at her across the clearing conference room, with its scattered coffee cups and legal pads and the slight disorder of a thing just finished. "The West Loop building," he said. "When the board finally comes around on the retail subdivision, call me before you start the renovation plans. I know the right people for that corridor." She looked at him for a moment. The expression on her face was the one he still hadn't found an exact word for, the one that had been in the room since the very first meeting, since the word that had landed wrong and then, somehow, hadn't been wrong at all. "I'll call you," she said, and she walked out and he stood there in the quiet of the room, and the city went on below, and there was Thursday.